Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Joe Davidge, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. On behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book, DeKalb County Public Library, and the DeKalb Library Foundation, welcome to another in our continuing series of virtual author events. Due to the global pandemic, we, like so many bookstores, publishing houses, and other event centers, have switched to online events in order to bring you the newest and best authors as their books become published. We hope that you enjoyed tonight's program, and we'd like to thank the DeKalb Library Foundation for providing us with a Zoom account to bring this event to you tonight. We'd also like to remind you that if you'd like to get a signed copy of this book, Mr. Figliuzzi has graciously signed book plates, and they are being sent to A Capella Books here in Atlanta, Georgia. So if you would like one of those copies, the order link will be provided in the chat section of the Zoom. We'd also like to remind you that if you would like to ask our guest any question this evening after the presentation, feel free to go ahead and type those questions into the Q&A feature that is either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your device, or you can also type it in the chat and we will moderate those questions. So this evening, we are very, very pleased to have a guest this evening in such a timely fashion with so many things going on in the world today. Of course, Frank Figliuzzi was the FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence and served 25 years as a special agent. In his current role as a respected national security analyst, Frank appears weekly on live television for NBC and MSNBC News. Frank held senior FBI leadership positions in major American cities, including Atlanta, and was appointed the FBI's chief inspector by then Director Robert Mueller to oversee sensitive internal inquiries, shooting reviews, and performance audits. Following his FBI career, Frank became a corporate security executive for a Fortune 10 company and led global investigations, insider threat, workplace violence prevention, and special event security for 300,000 employees in 180 countries. As the Bureau's head of counterintelligence, Mr. Figliuzzi directed all espionage investigations across the US government. He frequently briefed the White House, Congress, and the Attorney General. He also directed an FBI internal disciplinary unit in the Office of Professional Responsibility and adjudicated allegations of serious misconduct against FBI personnel. He is most noted for his clear and compelling television commentary regarding the Special Counsel investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential campaign. His FBI career highlights include leading the FBI's efforts to counter economic espionage in Silicon Valley, overseeing major financial crimes and public corruption in Miami, Florida, and Cleveland, Ohio, serving on-scene commander as the largest hazmat evidence recovery effort in FBI history at the Boca Raton, Florida, site of the nation's first anthrax murder, and publicly explaining the FBI's successful operation against 10 Russian sleeper agents inside the United States. Mr. Figliuzzi earned a Juris Doctorate cum laude from the University of Connecticut School of Law and a Bachelor of Arts degree in English Literature from Fairfield University. He completed certificate programs at Harvard University National Security Program for Senior Executives in Government at the John F. Kennedy School of Government and at Northwestern University Executive Course on Leading Strategic Change at the Kellogg School of Management. He is a sought-after speaker, panelist, and instructor on violence prevention, risk management, and the external and internal threats facing the United States. His new book, The FBI Way, Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence, details the 7 C's of the FBI's value code. The book is filled with stories from his storied career, going from an 11-year-old who wrote a letter to the director of the FBI in New Haven, Connecticut, through Elian Gonzalez, to the effects of COVID-19 on the Bureau today. We are so pleased to have him here. He has had a very, very busy schedule as of late, and we would like to welcome him this evening. So will you please join me to welcome our guest, Frank Figliuzzi. Frank?
Joe, thanks so much for the extremely gracious invitation to be here, to be back home, at least virtually, in the Atlanta area. My first office in the FBI was the Atlanta field office. You'll read all about that in the book. And with Joe's extremely comprehensive introduction, I'm wondering if we've already read the book to you. No, I'm just kidding. Here's why I wrote this book and what we're going to talk about tonight. The book is about the intersection of leadership and values. It's about the reality that the FBI, contrary to anything you might have heard otherwise, operates at an extremely high level of excellence and does so especially when the stakes are the highest. And boy, are the stakes about as high as you can get right now in our country. I spent 25 years, as Joe said, inside the FBI, not only observing how they do excellence and values-based leadership, but absorbing how they do it. And even, as Joe referenced, leading portions of the FBI that were responsible for internal looking, introspection, and analysis, and even investigation and discipline in sensitive FBI misconduct cases. The book's message is this: you don't need to spend 25 years inside the FBI to glean some of those leadership lessons about protecting what matters most for your family, your team, your community, your company, and even your country right now in the crisis that we're facing. I distilled all of that down into what I call the 7 C's. We'll go through them tonight with real life examples as time permits of each of those themes. And I call the book The FBI Way. Joe, if the timing is right, I'll kick off our discussion tonight of the 7 C's in the FBI way.
Please go right ahead, Frank. Thank you so much.
Well, look, people have often asked me, what is it that prompted you to write this book? And I've done something in writing this book that I thought I would never do. I didn't want to be that guy who shares the ups and downs of inside the FBI and a 25-year journey. But there came a point over the course of the last 4 years where I could no longer allow certain misperceptions to take hold about the FBI. And here's why. The FBI lives and dies by its public perception, the trust, the credibility that the FBI has to find in the public in order to succeed in its mission. And as we speak tonight, FBI agents throughout the country are knocking on doors, trying to get cooperation so they can stop the next act of domestic terrorism. And if a citizen has to pause, even for a minute, and consider whether or not some of the things they've heard about the Bureau might mean that they can't trust that agent at their door, then we're all in trouble. And look, the FBI has been under assault. Here are just some quotes from the past 4 years from Trump. FBI leaders are the, quote, scum on top of the agency, quote, a den of thieves. A quote from the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, who said, FBI agents are like Nazi stormtroopers. And even on NBC's Meet the Press, when Chuck Todd asked why the president might not agree to be interviewed by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, since the truth is the truth, Giuliani replied, no, it isn't truth. Truth isn't truth. Well, I'm here to tell you the truth is an objectively attainable reality, and much of our country seems unable to grasp that concept right now. We've seen senior executives at the FBI, including Director James Comey, Andy McCabe, and Peter Strzok, fired under this president, and we'll talk about that. We've seen Attorney General Barr, former Attorney General Barr, investigate the investigators, implying that something was wrong with how the investigation was doing, and even how his own Inspector General found that investigations were properly predicated under this president. And look, if you've ever been inside the FBI headquarters in Washington and been in that courtyard in the center of that block-long building, you've seen on the wall in the courtyard a quote from J. Edgar Hoover that says, the most effective weapon against crime is cooperation. The efforts of all law enforcement agencies with the support and understanding of the American people. That's why I wrote the book. I wanted to say not only are the things you're hearing not entirely true, but also the FBI way, the FBI's protection of its core values is such a successful template that there's lessons to learn from how they do it. So let's talk about preserving values, not only on a local level, not only on a corporate level, but on a national level. Started thinking about what made the FBI tick when one night, January 24th, 2012, I became the FBI's designated survivor the night of the State of the Union address on January 24, 2012. It was my turn as an assistant director to spend time in that infamous bunker, the location of which I still am not allowed to discuss, but the concept being that if a massive attack on Washington at that Capitol building where all of our national leaders are from all agencies ever happened, we needed continuity of government. We needed to preserve the way we do our democracy and the way we function, to preserve what matters most. And in that bunker that night, I thought, it's not me that they're trying to preserve, it's the FBI's mission and the FBI's ability to preserve the nation's values and our democracy. And that's when I started to come up with what I call the 7 C's, including code, conservancy, clarity, consequences, compassion, credibility, and consistency. We'll run through those quickly, certainly not like they are in the book in great detail, but I want to hit all of them for you tonight because they're so important in terms of what's going on in our nation right now, what happened with our insurrection, and what's happened over the last 4 years. So for times during my career, I was actually overseeing certain units and even divisions responsible for keeping the code. I was a kind of keeper of the code for times in my career. But I'm here to tell you that everyone in the FBI is a keeper of the code in terms of being responsible for something greater than themselves. And in your own family, your own team, organization, company, you should ask yourself whether we're all collectively responsible for enforcing the code. But the first thing you have to ask yourself is, do we even have a code? Many corporations will point to some core values or even a mission statement, and they've got it up on the wall, and they're very proud of it. But it may be time right now in the history of our country for you to dust that off and rethink it and make sure everyone knows what it is, because you can't have a code until you know what your core values are. The FBI lists its core values. Every employee knows what they are, knows where to find them. I list all 8 of them here and in the book, but look at that first one: rigorous obedience to the Constitution of the United States. Not rigorous obedience to a personality, not rigorous obedience to a flag with some president's name flying on it, rigorous obedience to the Constitution. That's what every FBI agent knows, and it starts from day one at the FBI Academy. You might say, Frank, why do you have a photo here, if you can see it, of a couple of agents training at the firearms range at the Academy at Quantico, Virginia? I have that because that's when it dawned on me on day one of the Academy that I was part of something bigger than myself and that I was going to be entrusted with something. When on that first day on the range, after you fire your rounds downrange at the target, you hear the voice of the instructor over the loudspeaker saying, move forward and score your target. And you realize I'm scoring my target, not some instructor coming down here and looking over my shoulder because they don't trust me. I'm being entrusted to do the honest thing, the right thing. It starts on day one. And ask yourself if you're entrusting your team with responsibility for things greater than themselves. The second C is so important and so important to our nation right now, and it's conservancy. So I wrote an entire chapter on the concept that preserving values as a group, organization, or nation is a team sport. So many times I walk into major corporations to do consulting, and I'll ask an employee, hey, who here in the company is responsible for compliance, integrity, standards? And they'll point down the hall at some office or unit that does, yeah, we have a standards and integrity office. We've got an audit team that comes around. That's who does it. Well, guess what? In the FBI, it's a conservancy. It's a collective team sport for every single employee to be responsible for each other's integrity, for their own, and even more importantly, they understand that that collective value system is protecting the FBI, who ultimately protects the nation. And so I talk about real stories in the book, never before approved for publication, now out in the book. And I explain that that concept starts very early. As a new agent in Atlanta, Georgia, I can recall my supervisor tapping me on the shoulder. I was very busy with an entire caseload of my own to solve. And he said, "Hey, Frank, I've got another case for you." And I said, "Oh, okay. Yep, that's what I need. I need another case." And so he said, "Well, this one is a car accident." And I said, "Excuse me?" "Well, here's the drill. When someone on your squad crashes or has a fender bender with their government vehicle, another squad mate has to investigate that. And it is for real. It's not a whitewash. There are photos and witness statements and sketches. And then you have to decide what happened here. And are we responsible collectively as an organization? Did your fellow agent screw it up?" And it's taken very seriously. You can see how they start ingraining that conservancy concept. It's not someone else's job, it's your job. And then later down the line, as you go into leadership, you have to spend time examining integrity issues, doing audits and inspections, and making hard calls about your fellow employees. It's part of the job. It's conservancy. And I talk about conservancy requiring sacrifice. When I talk to young people who say, I want to sign me up, I want to work for the FBI, I sit them down and I say, that's fantastic. Let's talk about sacrifice required in a conservancy. Let's talk about weekends and kids' ball games and holidays and birthdays that are missed repeatedly, perhaps year after year, because you are now part of the conservancy of the nation. But then I talk about the ultimate sacrifice that conservators could make. The photos you see here, the two photos include, on the left, Lori Fournier, who I had the privilege of working with when I was the head of the Cleveland field office of the FBI. Lori was one of our agents and perhaps one of the most decent and fun individuals you'd ever want to know. She was someone who played in the office rock band that was called Fed Up, and she sang. She was known for dancing on bubble wrap inside the office. She looked for fun, but she also was one of the founding members of the Employee Assistance Program team in the Cleveland office that would come alongside employees and their families who needed help and counseling and assistance, and she got them that help. She was also a member of the office evidence response team, and the Cleveland evidence response team, you know, those CSI television shows that you watch, she was part of that as her extracurricular duties, and they were renowned. The Cleveland team was renowned around the world for archaeological digs of recovering bodies and all kinds of things. She was part of that. But she also had stage 4 cancer. And eventually, unbeknownst to us, she was far sicker than any of us realized because she just kept working up until the very end. She died and left 2 young children and a husband. And I tell the story in the book about how sometimes a bureaucracy can really get in the way of compassion. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I changed the way headquarters provides benefit announcements and guidance to families of deceased agents because we needed to take care of our agents' families better than throwing a pamphlet at them and saying, here, our condolences, your loved one has passed away. Here are the benefits on a piece of paper. We changed bureaucracy because Lori's family and Lori deserved better. Later on, it was discovered that the type of cancer and the analysis of the medical situation for Lori was actually cancer caused by her deployment to the Shanksville, Pennsylvania site of the United Airlines flight that crashed into the ground on 9/11. and she was declared a service martyr because of a death connected to the line of duty. That's conservancy. The second picture is of Barry Bush. Barry Bush was part of my new agents class 8716 at the academy. But years later, while chasing a team of violent bank robbers, Barry was shot and killed. And that is ultimate sacrifice and conservancy. The next C in the book, the next chapter in the book is called clarity. Well, the FBI certainly brings clarity to people's lives and communities by putting handcuffs on some very bad people. And I like to think that the FBI brought clarity to the nation after 9/11 by determining who did it and how they did it and attributing it to Osama bin Laden and this group called Al Qaeda. But inside an organization, inside your family, inside your company, do you have the kind of clarity around the rules of the road where every member understands that there's no surprises here? This is how we conduct ourselves. These are our bright line rules, and the FBI has bright lines. This is the threat that is most existential to our mission and existence that we can't allow to happen. This is what we do. This is what we never do. In the FBI, the bright line, the clarity around one single thing that will absolutely get you fired is lying under oath. Why is that? Because an FBI employee is worthless to the organization if they're ever found to have lied under oath, because you can't put them on the witness stand as a credible witness. It would have to be disclosed to the defense and the jury, and that witness would be impeached. So you're always under oath when you're under administrative inquiry. You're under oath when there's internal inquiries. If you lie about something big or small, you are fired. It's that kind of thing that you need to identify in your organization or team or company, that one thing that makes your company tick and everything rests on. Why do you have a photo of a baby in a car seat, Frank? I get that question sometimes. And here's the answer. In the book, I tell the story of how you have to defend your values with clarity. When they're that clear, when it involves your bright line that should never be crossed, you need to fight like heck if anybody challenges that. That happened to me when I was in charge of adjudicating discipline in the Office of Professional Responsibility for a brief time in my career. We had a bright new agent in a major field office who lied about something small. He lied about the number of times he had picked up his toddler at daycare in his government vehicle. If he had told the truth, he would have gotten 30 days suspension without pay for an unauthorized passenger in his car. He chose to lie under oath about the number of times he did it, and it was a significant difference. We had evidence of toll pass usage at various times and locations. We had sign-out logs at the daycare center. I couldn't for the life of me figure out why he chose to do this. I discussed that at length too, why very good people sometimes can't see the reality of their conduct. However, it was time to make a tough call. And the tough call was we needed to dismiss him. This went all the way to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. He took us to court, and it went all the way. At a lower level, one judge said, and I was on the witness stand, "Mr. Figliuzzi, you need to tell your director, these bright lines are too harsh. This is too tough." And at that point, the FBI decided no judge is going to tell us how to police the FBI and what's important to us. I think in our nation, the nation has let some other people, some elected officials, tell some of us what our values are. We lack clarity today about our bright lines, our core values. We won that case in court. The next C is consequences. Well, if you've got bright lines, you got your core values, you've got code, and you've got clarity and conservancy, what are you going to do about it if somebody doesn't play along with the team? Someone's done something so threatening to what you stand for and who you are. There better be consequences. So many leaders are so reluctant, especially in corporate settings, Well, that's a very popular employee, or that's a senior ranking person. We can't afford to lose him or her. It's going to be painful if we do the right thing here. The FBI is really good at doing the right thing, even when the consequences are painful. And so let me give you an example. This young lady in the photo, one of the worst things I've ever heard in my career, and I've heard some bad things on audio recordings, was the case in St. Louis where the FBI had a FISA court authorized secret microphone that was implanted in the kitchen of a family where the husband was part of a terrorist cell inside the United States. But one day, the translator came in to translate the recording from the previous day. It was in Arabic. And what she heard on that audio tape was a mother and father murdering their daughter in a so-called Muslim honor killing. She had the audacity to date a non-Muslim. She had the audacity to get a part-time job to pay for college. And they had the shocking ability to kill their daughter. We had it on tape. We had a decision to make with painful consequences. We could disclose that secret microphone and that tape to the police and know that our entire terrorist cell investigation, classified operation, was going to be ruined, would end up in court because of the existence of that tape. Some other agencies in some other countries might have handled it differently, figured out some way to let the police know secretly who did this. But we didn't do that. We told the police and we gave them the tape of the murder. We did the right thing that day, even though it had severe consequences for us in our case. The next C is compassion. So far you might say, Frank, this sounds interesting, sounds pretty harsh though. A lot of consequences, everybody having to look at each other, everybody being accountable for each other. That's tough. Here's where compassion comes in. Some of the brightest moments of my career involved showing compassion, and even the cold, hard bureaucracy of the large FBI is about humanity. If you're in a corporation and you're in charge of HR, legal, compliance, security standards, don't treat it like you could have a robotic algorithm or a computerized algorithm or software program that does your decision-making for you. That might be nice, but it's not going to be human. You need the human touch. You need compassion along with consequences. And so I tell the story in the book, again, cleared for the first time, when I was heading up disciplinary decisions. One day, one of the agents walked into my office. I had a huge stack of allegations and investigative reports in front of me. And he said, "Hey, boss, just a heads up. We've got a case coming in from investigations where an agent purchased heroin for his wife." And I looked up from my desk and I said, "That's a dismissal." And the agent said, "I'm not so sure." And as we dug into the investigation, the internal inquiry, we found an agent and his family under horrific stress, almost unimaginable. The wife had become addicted. He had gotten her into rehab. There had been success and then not success. They had 2 small children. One day when he had a day off and was responsible for watching the kids as his wife went through withdrawal symptoms, he got called in on a major case that he had been supporting in the office. It was an emergency. The in-laws were gone. The babysitter was not around. He had to make a choice. He made a horrific choice in judgment, as many people do under severe stress. But he got his wife in the car with the kids, went into the inner city, and found her a fix of heroin. But since FBI agents are Boy Scouts, he didn't do it very well. He ended up buying from a police informant who identified the car, identified him. It got reported to us. And instead of firing him, the employee assistance program came alongside him and his family and got him some major help that he had been mortified to seek out himself. He took a heavy hit on a suspension without pay. don't get me wrong, but it was time to show compassion. Compassion is the key to getting people to comply with your core values. If you force it down their throats, if your employees think that you're unfair, that you lack the human touch in enforcing the core values, they'll never buy them. They'll never adapt to the corporate values if they don't feel there's fairness. And then we move on to the next chapter of credibility. Look, the credibility of the FBI is its success. It either survives or it dies on its reputation and perception. And it does it under stress all the time. And here's the message of this chapter. Credibility is not being perfect. This is not a book that claims that the FBI is perfect. It is not. In fact, the book is filled with mistakes that the FBI has made. But rather, credibility is about being passionate about getting it right. And when you screw up, being transparent about what happened and what you're going to do to fix it. That gets leaders the kind of credibility they deserve. Ask yourself as a leader, if you have the kind of credibility that employees can look at and say, I'm with this person. I think they can do it. I trust them not to be perfect, but to be passionate about getting it right. And just as an example of the kind of credibility, even as a young agent, that was hammered home to me in terms of how the public trusts or not the Bureau. As a very young agent in Atlanta, Georgia, I had to rush blue light siren. The details are in the book. It's cleared for the first time for publication. I'm sure some media organization is going to eventually get this and call me if they ever find this story. I had to go to Hartsfield Airport. I had to run into the international terminal, and I had to stop a fully loaded Lufthansa airliner from taking off on its way to Germany. It's all about an assassination plot and a hit team of a visiting international dignitary. And I took out my credentials with those 3 bright blue letters, FBI. I took the gate agent aside and I said, we got a problem with this flight and this plane cannot take off right now. And that German gate agent in a thick German accent looked at me and said, this plane is always on time. It is not going to be late tonight. And I looked at him and I said, the plane's not taking off. And if I have to grab the cockpit, I have to go into the cockpit and grab the captain, I'll do it. He reluctantly went out, got the captain out of the cockpit. He came out to see me. I showed him the credentials and I explained that there was a threat involving that aircraft. And he looked at me and he said, you're the boss. And that flight didn't take off on time that night. That's the kind of credibility, the kind of life-saving credibility that is required by every FBI employee, should be required of every leader. I also tell the story in the book about a boss that I had fairly early in my career, my first time at headquarters. My unit chief was a guy by the name of Robert Philip Hansen. You may remember that name because Robert Hansen was the most damaging spy in the history of the FBI. Years later, after I moved on with my career and I became the second ranking official in the Miami field office, I was driving to work one day on the Florida Turnpike when on the radio I heard the FBI had arrested one of its own, Robert Philip Hansen, who had spied for 10 years on behalf of the Russians. You say, Frank, you put that story in the credibility chapter? Why? Because the FBI screwed up with Robert Hansen. He should never have been hired. For 10 years, he was living above his means. There were all kinds of indicators while he was spying for the Russians. But the FBI was passionate about hunting down the mole. We knew there was a problem. And when we discovered that the problem in the intelligence community was one of our own, we put handcuffs on him and made the case. And then we came out and announced it and said, here's what we're doing to fix it. And an entire security division was enhanced and all kinds of measures taken to make it right, to lessen the chance that it would ever happen again. And then I chose deliberately to end on consistency, the last of the 7 C's. And boy, do we need this message right now as families and as a nation. Here's the message. Under severe stress, which the FBI is under every single day in any given field office, it's natural human tendency to abandon all your training, all your core values, all your principles, because you're facing an unprecedented threat. I tell the story here of my time as the on-scene commander at the first anthrax murder in the history of the United States. We had to send an FBI evidence team into an anthrax-filled, 3-story, 60,000 square foot building. This had never happened before in the history of the United States. What we could have said was, we've never done this before. This is an unprecedented threat. We must figure out some other way to do this. Let's abandon our training principles and values. But instead we said, is this a crime scene? Yes, it is. Do we do crime scenes really well? Yes, we do. Is it a hazmat environment? Yes, it is. Have we been trained to operate in a hazmat environment? We have. So it's a crime scene in a hazmat environment. That's what we're going to do. That's how we're going to treat it. The nation needs to do the same thing. A lot of people come up to me and say, Frank, this is unprecedented stress. The nation is breaking apart. We've never seen this before. And I say to them, we've been through a civil war, presidential assassinations, presidential impeachments, the Vietnam War and protests, the civil rights movement and violence in this country. We'll get through this with consistency if we cling to what got us here in the first place, our democratic republic and its values of the Constitution, 3 equal branches of government, and the rule of law. Consistency, a steady battle rhythm, sticking with what got you here, that'll get you through just about anything. Just ask an FBI agent. That's my message from the book. The fun part of this is when you get to ask questions and I get to try to answer them. Right, Joe?
Exactly, Frank. Real quick before we sort of jump in, because we do have quite a few questions that people have been typing in the Q&A portion. Folks had a couple questions for clarification. In the Conservancy section, the Gillio-Henthorne Act and what POD stands for. I think we're on the slide.
Yep. So one of the reasons there's actual case law that talks about the absolute requirement for prosecutors and agents to disclose any baggage they have that might impact their truthfulness, honesty, veracity. So that's why that FBI employee who's found to lie about anything under oath is worthless to the Bureau, and that's why it's that bright line, because the law says you've got a requirement to disclose to the defense and to the judge that one of your witnesses, one of your law enforcement witnesses, has been a proven liar. That's why we have that bright line that can't be crossed, the Giglio-Henthorne case that's in the federal law books. Oh, I've lost your audio.
Oh, I'm sorry. What about POD, Frank? It was on the slide.
Oh, you're quizzing me on my own slides.
It's our patrons. Our patrons are catching it. So,
do I have to go back? Do I have to go back in there and find it? Do we remember the context of the POD?
I did not. He did say. Let me go back because I asked. It was in the Conservancy slide by Barry Bush and Lori Fournier.
Yeah. We have abbreviations for everything. I must have abbreviated something that I can't recall, but I'll take a look while we're going through here.
Got it. Well, while I sort through some of these, you mentioned several times, of course, Atlanta was sort of like your first stop in your FBI career. You were a Connecticut Yankee, but you came to, of course, the grandest city in the South. And you do mention in the book, and it even caused me to go, the good thing about working in a library, go do some digging in some articles, that the Atlanta Bureau dealt with a lot of civil rights issues and things like that. What was that like? Coming from Connecticut, being your first assignment, and being thrust into, I don't want to say a hotbed, but Atlanta
Yeah. No, I'm
is a
gonna
metropolitan city, and kind of,
yeah.
and it's always had issues like that.
There's a lot to unpack in that very simple question. First, let me respond to what POD means. It's performance of duty. So you have, I listed there some numbers. The number of agents who are considered service martyrs, meaning they died as a direct result of adversarial action. The biggest example would be being shot by a bad guy. And then there's a subset of people who died in the performance of their duties, POD. So it might be a car crash during a chase, for example, but it's not at the direct hands of an adversary, but you were killed in the performance of your duties. Thanks for the quiz, Joe. Okay, let's talk about the culture clash, and why in heaven's name would the FBI send a Connecticut Yankee down south? In fact, why is the FBI so reluctant to send anyone early in their career back home? That's the real question. And it comes back to the conservancy and the core values, right? Because why is it that the FBI doesn't have historically systemic corruption? We've all heard of police departments that are just notorious over decades for having systemic corruption problems, agents on the take, officers soliciting bribes, dealing in drugs. It's extremely rare. One of the reasons, and one of many, by the way, is we don't send you back home. Perhaps never. I tried my entire career to get back home to Connecticut. No such luck. So why is that? You might get too comfortable back with the kids you grew up with. Many of you, and your allegiances might not be to the values of the organization. They might be to something else. And so you can walk into any FBI field office in the country and things are going to get done the same way. And boy, I've worked in many of the FBI offices in the country, and they're done the same way. And there's a beauty to that, and a reliance on the code and the core values that I think are essential. So what was it like as a young agent who had never been to the Deep South being assigned to Georgia? It was a blast. I thought it was a fantastic city, but I will tell you, there are cultural differences, and I discuss them in the book. And I think a lot of people looked at me down there and said, "Where are you from?" And then, I had a funny last name that a lot of people were trying to figure out, and where, what is that? But you know what? People are people. There's good people and there's some not so good people who play by a different code, and you can figure out who's on the code, who's got the core values, and who doesn't, no matter what city you're in. But I loved my time in Atlanta. I worked counterintelligence, believe it or not, and I tell a story about a major counterintelligence operation. Some of your viewers tonight might say, "What do you mean? There's spies in Atlanta? Come on. Terrorists here? Come on." Read the book.
And it's fascinating, some of the stories that you tell about Atlanta. Because I think it does make it ring home when you could point to locations, things on Lucky Street, things here, things there. I think that's great.
I tell the story of overnight surveillances on Lucky Street and the Black Hebrew Israelites that moved into an old abandoned hotel on Lucky Street. That's a good story. And I was in Tower Number 4 during the Atlanta prison insurrection with the Cuban prisoners that tried to burn the place down and succeeded with most of it. That was me, surrounded by smoke in Tower Number 4. Those about 10 days in that tower. Yeah.
Well, we've got a lot of questions, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump on in. And it seems that a lot of them still fit while we're talking about conservancy, because we've got some questions about Mr. Comey. And he is featured in that section. I was reading it, the two quotes. sort of like from when he was in the thick of things versus, when he was no longer there and could kind of look back on it. And I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
have a few, so I'm going to try and combine a few of these.
Mhm.
One of our viewers asks, Michael said, did Comey not leak information about or that led to the Mueller investigation? And
So
then,
you broke up for a second there. Did Comey not leak information about, or was that the question?
yeah, did not Comey leak information about or that led to the Mueller investigation?
Okay, so leak is a loaded word, but let's call it what it is. The Comey has conceded that when he knew he was getting fired, he had squirreled away a couple of internal memos, by the way, that he authored, and by the way, were not classified. And as kind of an insurance against him being prosecuted by what he thought was a corrupt president, he provided those memos to a friend, knowing and perhaps encouraging that friend to pass them to the media. That was his way of saying, yeah, they're gonna come after me. I honestly don't recall whether they were about Bruce Orr at DOJ or not, but he clearly did something that I would have been fired for doing. Even though I had authored memos and even though they were unclassified, squirreling them out of the building and giving them to someone knowing they're going to go to the media, that's a problem. But there's even a larger issue with Comey that I address in the book, which is, first, let's say this. He is a man of very high integrity and ethics. His career has proven that. And I don't want anything I'm about to say to imply that he was bad intentioned. I don't believe that at all. But here's where the issue is that I have. This is all about preserving the values that matter most, right? For the organization and for the country. When Jim Comey called that infamous press conference with the flags draped behind him, and he announced, quote, no reasonable prosecutor would ever prosecute Hillary Clinton, there are about 2 or 3 problems with that. First, it's not the FBI's job to make prosecutive decisions. He forgot who he was. Now, I can forgive it a bit because he was a prosecutor for most of his career. In fact, he was the U.S. attorney in New York. He was the deputy attorney general of the United States. But he forgot that he was an FBI guy now. They don't make prosecutive decisions. He forgot about accountability to the attorney general, who's his boss. He made a decision. I know he wanted to save the attorney general. He wanted to take all of this on his shoulders. He wanted, ironically, for this to be a non-political decision. If you give it to the attorney general, it's going to be politicized, right? Well, guess what? He politicized the FBI the moment he said nobody would prosecute her. Now, the moment he said that, I'll never forget. I watched that on TV and I went, the FBI is in big trouble because now half the country is going to go, they're political. And then, of course, you know the rest. He then had to later announce, we've reopened the case on Hillary. We found new emails. And then on the eve of the election, he goes, oh, never mind. We didn't find any new emails. Wow. So I get it, but the damage done to the FBI, and look, the damage he did was nothing compared to the fact that now he handed the president an excuse to denigrate the agents, the Bureau, and do the damage for 4 years that was done. And so I'm not saying Comey is fully responsible for all the damage. No, I'm saying he handed the president this excuse to go after the organization. Terribly harmful, terribly regrettable.
So maybe this is going to be a quick question from Sally. She's asking, can Andy Mccabe get his job back? Well,
I don't know if a lot of people know this, but FBI agents, and Andy Mccabe is an actual career FBI agent. That's the other thing I think is almost sadly hysterical, which is, the president implying that, well, there's this deep state. These people are political. The only person in the executive management of the FBI who's not a gun and badge carrying career FBI agent is the director. And actually, we once had a director who was a gun and badge carrying agent. That was Louis Freeh. So, although he left and came back. Andy Mccabe, that means, why am I talking about this? Andy Mccabe was an agent. And guess what? He retired, or he's done. He was fired, but he's now, I think, moving across the age barrier, FBI agents have to mandatorily retire at age 57. That's the stress of the job. You can retire as early as at any age if you have 25 years of service, and I did, and that's what I did. And it was turmoil personally to leave the organization that I loved. But at the assistant director level, after 25 years of serving from the streets of San Francisco, Atlanta, Cleveland, Miami, etc., it was time to go. It was time. It's time. Andy will not be back. Here's the real question for me: can he get his full pension back? He's suing for his termination. His termination lacked the credibility, the 6th chapter in my book, of a truly fair decision internally. I'm not coming down. I don't know whether Andy Mccabe lied to investigators under oath. I don't know, but I know how to discipline senior executives. I sat on the senior executive disciplinary board. I know how he was fired with 26 hours left before he could get his pension by then Attorney General William Sessions. No, that's not how it works. That decision lacked credibility for me.
So I'm going to combine a few questions that are a similar theme. And it has a lot to do with, of course, the presidency in the past 4 years and the statements that he's made and the reputation of the FBI and how he kind of imperiled that reputation with the statements he made. And the question is, what can the FBI do going forward to try and repair that, to unring those bells? And whose responsibility is it for the adherence to the code? Is it the director of the FBI? Is it the president? Who makes those kind of calls at the end of the day?
All right, let's take the first question first, since it's first. It's really a two-part question. What can the FBI do, and what should the incoming Biden administration do to help restore not only the FBI, but the key institutions throughout our government? My Lord, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention right there in Atlanta have been disparaged. These are career people who just come to work trying to cure diseases and find viruses, and they've been disparaged. And oh my word, the Department of Justice. So here's the thing. Those rank and file folks, I dedicated my book to the rank and file FBI employees who come to work every day just trying to do the right thing. They need to keep their head down and keep doing their job. They need to do a better job at marketing their successes. So during the last 4 years, I would see a little column somewhere in a newspaper report, or I'd hear that this happened. And what happened was a major cartel leader was taken down. A terrorist act was prevented. Some child sex ring was broken up, right? And I'd sit there and I'd go, well, let's see if the White House thanks the FBI for stopping this act of terrorism or catching this spy. Crickets, nothing. So they should keep their head down, keep doing the job they've been doing, and market their successes more. But here's the other side of that equation. What can the incoming Biden administration do? In addition to saying, thank you, FBI, for taking that cell down, here's the response. Stay out of the way of the career professionals who must remain apolitical. Don't take the FBI director to dinner and demand loyalty. Don't think the Attorney General of the United States is your personal lawyer, right? Stay out of the way. Let them make their investigative decisions that they get paid to make.
And actually, that is a good segue into this next question. Someone who identifies himself as a former Army officer and former Fairfield Stag. How frustrating is it to try and uphold the values in a society that makes it seem like an outdated concept?
Well, first, thank you for your service to the nation as an Army officer, and go Stags. For those of you who have no idea what this guy is saying, or is it a man or a woman? Do we have a first name?
It was a gentleman, actually. Yes.
Okay. Well, sir, thank you for your service. And this guy went to the same college that I went to in Fairfield, Connecticut, Fairfield University, the Stags. Good to hear you, and good to know that there's other Connecticut Yankees, perhaps on this call. Values outdated as a concept. Well, that's part of what prompted me to write this book. I have to wonder if we're teaching, since we came from a common college, I have to wonder if what we're teaching our kids today. I don't want to sound like this old fogey, right? Talk about kids today, but those people who went into that Capitol building and destroyed glass and doors and tried to destroy our democracy and beat police officers, trapping them in security doors. That image, that video of the officer in tactical gear screaming for help from his tactical team. Ultimately, a police officer was murdered. Some were seeking to kill our highest elected officials. Those people, they don't have values like us. They don't have our code. They're not conservators of what we stand for. And so I have to wonder, where have we gone wrong on two levels in terms of education? First, are we teaching our kids to be intelligent consumers of information? Or are they spending their lives online, filling their minds with hoaxes, fake news, fabrications? Something like, I don't know, 70% of a certain political party in our country thinks that Trump won the election. Are you kidding me? Well, where do you get this from? And so we've lost the concept of objective fact and reality, right? Rudy Giuliani, the truth isn't the truth. Okay, well, what is it then? So teach your kids, when you're watching some news, God forbid, with your child, right? Or you're looking at a news story, teach them to ask hard questions. Let's go see how this other place is covering this story. And then, are we teaching civics anymore? Do kids understand the three branches of government? Can they name them? Do they understand they're supposed to oversee each other with checks and balances? Do they get that at all? Do they understand that each state runs its own elections? Do they understand the Electoral College? I don't think so. I don't think so, because the ease with which we went down this road of fabricated fantasy, the QAnon folks who think the world is run by cannibalistic pedophiles and only Donald J. Trump can save us. You're kidding me. I don't get it. I don't know how we got there. I know that what we've seen happen over the last 4 years looks an awful lot to me like what I saw when I worked counterterrorism, which is a kind of radicalization process that goes on. And the speed with which it happened here is earth-shattering.
And actually that leads into some questions we had as well about, should we as a nation, and maybe, not sure who would do this, should we, if someone seeks political office, should they have to submit to some sort of rigorous psychological testing, like agents would, things like that? And, what do we do about, law enforcement officers who are now connected to the far right?
Okay.
And, how do we deal with those individuals as well?
Great questions, because both of them really relate to vetting and screening people in positions of trust. I make the point in the book, and I've made it on television several times. People come up to me sometimes and say, Frank, how in the world did this senator ever get a top secret clearance? What the heck happened here? How did this president get a top secret clearance? And it's a teachable moment for me, because I have to show them that we don't do background investigations on elected officials. You voted for him or her. You got him. It was your homework that you didn't do. But here's the problem. We've never really looked at the guy in the Oval Office as a potential national security threat in our history. I'm here to tell you, and I tell stories in the book, again, published for the first time, that this isn't just about a president. In my career as an FBI agent, I had to sit across from a sitting member of Congress and confront them with the fact that a foreign intelligence service was calling them an informant, that they were an informant for a foreign intelligence service, and that I wasn't going to stop preaching and he was going to have to stop doing what he was doing. And I had to do it for a candidate for president. I had to sit across a minor candidate for president 1 year, and I had to let them know with a wink and a nod that we knew they were clandestinely dealing with foreign intelligence officers. So here's the deal. The threat is real. We've got to do a better job of vetting our highest office candidates nationally. I'm not talking about some secret panel that picks who the next president is and looks at their background investigation. I'm talking about a national vetting process with mandatory financial disclosures, tax return disclosure, financial and foreign entanglements of you and your family. Get it out. It should be required. It should be mandatory.
Frank, I want to go ahead and combine some questions again about what role does the FBI have in dispelling the myths that are being perpetrated online and other places by QAnon, and these ideas that led to the insurrection? And what is being done to bring these seditionists to justice, the investigative process, and what kind of punishments are these people looking at?
Okay, so again, a loaded question. Let's try to unpeel this.
Okay.
What role does the FBI play in getting truth to people? Look, this is far beyond a law enforcement problem in terms of what's happened in this country. People are buying lies, and it's being fueled by social media. The FBI, it's not their job to come out every day and go, here are the lies we saw today on your social media. We don't, this requires a holistic societal response. And I think we need to start looking hard at big tech, Silicon Valley social media platforms. They are starting to get it in gear now, right? Taking down, they permanently banned the president off of Twitter and Facebook. They've taken down Parler in terms of not offering the apps on which Parler resides, but they're getting back up and running. So I also remind people, be careful what you ask for. This is a two-edged sword, taking people down, taking platforms down, because I saw this in international terrorism. We kept taking down the comms of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, right? Deny them their communication abilities. Well, guess what? They went encrypted. They went into the darkest corners of the web where we couldn't necessarily find them. And what's happening right now, since Parler came down, people started migrating to encrypted social media sites. The President of the United States has said he's going to leave office and do what? Start a digital media platform. Okay, so here comes the potential for an ex-president leading an echo chamber where people get nothing but the same thought with no guardrails, right? Right now, you can go home, check your Facebook account, go, oh, Uncle Tommy, he's acting up again. Uncle Tom, you're crazy, man. Stop talking like that. You can't do it if Uncle Tommy is on an encrypted site that you can't see. There's no guardrails, right? They only hear their own voices. So be careful what you ask for there. We've got a domestic terrorism problem. I'll leave you with this thought about the law enforcement role. The FBI Agents Association, the men and women who come to work every day trying to combat this, they wrote a letter last year to Congress. I've never seen this kind of letter before. They said, we can't handle this threat. This domestic terrorism threat's out of control. We need a domestic terrorism law. We need the same investigative tools of designating certain groups and organizations and then allowing us to take hard looks at them with things like informants and undercover agents and court-ordered wiretaps so that we can prevent the next act of terrorism. We've successfully prevented major terrorism since 9/11 because we're getting that right investigatively and legislatively. We have a law called international terrorism, material support. You can go to jail for the rest of your life. You can be executed. Those people inside the Capitol, you asked about their charges. Well, right now, because we're in a race against the clock, they're getting charged with things like trespass, right? Holding a weapon. Oh, okay. Destruction of property. Okay. Eventually, the FBI is going to get to conspiracy, possible sedition, inciting a riot. There's going to be some serious charges federally against the leaders. But right now, no one's going to jail for domestic terrorism because there's no such law.
Oh, well. So I want to take this in a little bit of a lighter direction. And one of our attendees asks, do you have any advice for students or people early in their careers who would be interested in the opportunity to join the FBI? And another one of our attendees asks about sort of like the racial makeup of the FBI. It's like, you know, why are there so many FBI agents that are mainly considered as the majority of white and male? Is there systemic racism within the FBI? And what is the FBI doing to be more diverse and more inclusionary?
I have to start taking notes on these 4-part questions, Joe. All right, here we go. You'll help me out if I forget an element.
I will.
All right, I love the young person question because if nothing else happens from this book, right? I already hear that CEOs are picking it up and that's fantastic and that's great. But if nothing else happens, but a young kid reads this book and says, I might want to be an FBI agent, or I might want to be an FBI scientist, or I might want to be an FBI linguist, or any myriad of hundreds of jobs in the FBI, then I've had a successful book. I was that kid, as you said in my intro. At age 11, I wrote a letter to the head of the FBI in Connecticut where I lived. And lo and behold, he wrote me back. And he said, yeah, give us a call about 15 years. Here's what you got to do. I tell young people this, it is a calling and a vocation. If you're looking for a job where you got all your weekends off, and I keep hearing this term from young people, forgive me, work-life balance. That's real big. And I hear kids say, I had no work-life balance this week. Okay. I have a 30,000-foot view of work-life balance, which is you're going to have a good month and a hard month. You're going to have a good year and a hell of a year. Stop talking to me about work-life balance this week. So, if you need that, maybe this isn't for you. This is, you've got to have some sacrifice here, but it's a rewarding job of a lifetime. And it was a roller coaster adventure every single year of my career. All right. What are the 3-4 parts of that question?
Okay. It was about the racial makeup of the FBI, that we mostly see white males as FBI agents.
I got it. Okay, really important. Gets us into the much larger issue of the so-called defund the police movement, right? And the disparate treatment of different groups in our society by law enforcement. Many people watched the video of the insurrection on Capitol Hill and said, hey, wait a minute. If that group breaking through the security at the Capitol had been a different skin color, would they even still be alive? It's an excellent question. When you look at the riots that occurred this summer, even in Atlanta, and you look at the police response and presence there, when the intelligence, see, I look at it as a pure security professional. Security planning is supposed to be based entirely on a risk and threat model. Do you have the intelligence indicating big trouble's coming? If you do, stand up that presence and posture. But what we saw this summer was we didn't have a lot of intel saying that these largely peaceful protesters were going to start really doing damage. But even though we didn't have that in the beginning, we still saw riot police in riot gear. We had the calls for troops on the ground, National Guard. We could debate this all evening, but the bottom line is this. I think we do need to reimagine the police, not defund them. Ironically, my experience around the country with police departments is that the ones who have lower funding are the ones that are the most poorly trained and most likely not to be trained in de-escalation, verbal skills, soft skills, don't shoot skills, right? We spend a lot of time learning how to shoot. How about training on when not to shoot? That was a large part of my FBI training. Shooter restraint, it's called. Talking your way out of something, it's called. Recruiting the right people through extensive psychological testing. Very expensive. Might require you to refund the police in a different way. Might require you to fund mental health professionals who embed on every shift of a police department so they take that domestic call or they ride along on the suicide or drug addicted call. With regard to the FBI, your questioner is exactly right. The FBI is desperately working to look more like America and the nation it protects, both from a gender perspective, more women, and from a race and ethnicity perspective. You can't work crime and national security threats if you're a bunch of white guys running around trying to pretend that you're not FBI. It just doesn't work. You don't relate to the cities you're trying, the people you're trying to protect. They make really strong recruitment efforts. They need to work harder at it. There's a lot of competition for young, talented people. And some of it, Joe, involves money, salary, right? If you're going to make a decision, okay, wait a minute, and especially, look, let's face reality. You're an African-American young person. You've gotten fed all of this police abuse and excessive force. By the way, much of it true, right? And your friends are saying, excuse me, you want to do what? You want to carry a badge and a gun? Can't you go make $100,000 a year with that college degree or that law school degree or that master's degree? Are you crazy? We have to overcome that hurdle. We have to rethink and reimagine how we police.
Excellent. Well, just with the last few minutes we have, because of course, I'm sure we could go ahead and keep on going with the questions coming in, but I know your time is quite valuable, Frank. So we do have a question about your career and humorous stories. You tell us a lot of great stories. There's a lot of intense stories, but it was a career of 25 years. You have to have a humorous story, a Keystone Cop, or a lazy crook that did something completely stupid and boneheaded to get caught. What about any of those to close on?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. But look, there's a story in the book, and then you may say, wait a minute, this is a funny story. It's not really funny, but it's lighthearted in the sense that while I was the on-scene commander at the Anthrax crime scene, one day, boy, we spent about 2 weeks doing that first entry into that, in and out of that non-air conditioned Miami heat building, right? And the agents and the evidence team were in Tyvek suits, hazmat, positive air pressure respirators, the sweat drenching when they came out and took the suit off and decon. It's stress, right? White House is literally calling me. I tell that story in the book while I'm in the parking lot. And I look one day, I look out of the corner of my eye and I see something waddling out of the parking garage, the underground parking garage. And I say to another agent, I go, did you just see that? Yes, sir. What is that? What was that? He goes, it's a possum. Possum's coming in and out of the building. And I looked at him and I said, we can't have a poisoned possum walking around the neighborhood, possibly covered in microscopic anthrax spores. There's a playground down the street. I know, sir. We called a veterinarian and he's on the way. I won't tell you the fate of the possum, but that's one of the stories in the book. I can tell you other stories about bank robbers who use their actual deposit slip with their name on it to write the demand note and give it to the teller and say, this is a robbery. And the other side of it has their name and their bank account information. I've seen that before. I've seen a bank robber who later applied for a job and listed as a reference the FBI agent who arrested him. So, yeah, if you can't have humor under stress, you're not a healthy person.
Wow, unbelievable. Folks, don't forget that, of course, A Capella Books here in Atlanta is our designated bookseller this evening. A Capella Books does mail to your home. They also do curbside pickup, and within certain zip codes, they do delivery to your doorstep. So do click the link to order the book. It is a very insightful read. It has some great stories that will make you go looking through old newspapers and things like that. And of course, it is part science experiment, because when you read it, you do manage to go get a jug and a full bottle of wine. Those are a little harder to find due to the pandemic. They're mostly recyclable bottles of wine, at least in this household at some point. But that great thing about trigger skills and holding the gallon jug. I did diet, so you all would know that this is filled with a gallon of liquid. I wasn't just playing around when I was doing this experiment this afternoon.
For those of you who have no idea what Joe is talking about, you clearly haven't read the first chapters of the book. But I do. You must get a bottle of wine and a gallon of beverage to get through the first couple of chapters.
Well, and I do have to say, I was much better with the bottle of wine, holding it out, than I was with the gallon jug on the fingertip. But we'll keep practicing. I'll keep practicing with that. We'll see how that goes.
Thank you. If not, just drink the bottle of wine.
There, absolutely. You see, there's benefits all the way around to this. So, well, Frank, thank you so much for joining this evening. It has been absolutely delightful with all of your wonderful answers and this great book that combines this 7 C's and gets us back to our core values and gives us great stories for your career. Thank you so much. And we will probably see you a little more on the news in these coming weeks.
Yes. Let's hope that you aren't seeing me on the news tomorrow during the inauguration, because that means we've had a problem. So good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe in Atlanta and DeKalb County. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank. Good night, everyone.
Bye.